And we're live. It is Thursday. It is May 1st, May Day, the year of our Lord, or so people say, 2025. It is 8 o'clock a.m. Washington, D.C. time. Look, people, um, we have survived another month. There's only like a million of them left to go. But it's a million and one less one. So you came through. Um, and you know, we are turning a corner, and the problem is it's all corners. And my wrist only has one joint, so I can't do that, that endless cornering thing. But we've turned another corner. The sun is shining, sort of. The birds are chirping. It's going to be a great freaking day. And
You're watching Dog Shirt TV, an epic revolution in morning television.
you are watching Dog Shirt TV, and it is a freaking revolution in morning television, and one of the revolutionary features. And as I sometimes say, there are many of them,
There's many.
is that Holly has a mug, the writing of which is so large now that you can't actually see what it
This is the mug
says.
you asked me about before. It's the Acadia mug.
Oh, good morning.
Yeah, with
This
the
is the Good
lobster.
Morning Acadia mug.
It's got the little, look at the little lobster. I
You
love
know,
that.
Joe and Mika have no lobsters on their show. They have no, they don't have giant mugs at all.
What does yours say?
Mine
And Kenya, what does yours
is
say?
the
Let's do a mug.
Maryland
Oh,
Carey
hey,
School of Law. Oh,
a
and
Maryland.
Kenya has a K mug. Uh, um, so,
It's very,
one of the revolutionary features is we all have giant mugs. And another one of the revolutionary features is that this show has been running long enough that it is now too warm for Holly to wear her pajama sweatshirt. And so she has graduated to t-shirts, which means
was
we are
actually,
going to have to get her some dog shirts.
oh,
Be-
yeah, I've been looking at dog shirt. I have a dog shirt sweater that I've
Yeah,
worn.
but if the pajama t-shirt is too warm, the pajama sweatshirt is too warm, then the dog shirt sweater is going to be too warm. I think you need some like OG dog
Yeah, I
shirts.
like
And
the one you're wearing today. That
yeah,
one is
this is
very
one of my
cool.
favorite
I
dog
like
shirts.
dogs with sunglasses. By the way, I'm a bit of a not a beef, but just a query, a polite query. I have not seen you wearing the pug dog shirt that I gave you, and I'm wondering, did it not fit?
No, it fits, and I have it.
I
And
mean, I will say the color probably does wash you out, but I've never known you to care about
no,
that.
no, no, I don't care about that at all. There is really only two factors that affect which dog shirt get worn on a given day. One is which dog shirts are clean, and the second is which one, when I reach into the pile of clean dog shirts, I happen to come out with. And those are the two, they're pretty random factors. And so Pug Shirt will have its day.
Okay, well, I have not seen you in it like ever, and it's been a long time since I gave
No,
it to you.
it has been worn.
Okay,
I
all right.
promise.
I won't
And
take offense.
this is again, you're not on every single show. Not that I'm
I
hurling guilt.
almost am though, because I'm
You're
that
you're on
pathetic.
you're on a lot, but there are
Yeah.
those shows you're not on, and sometimes a dog shirt
Okay, all
slips
right.
through.
Well, I listen to
When
the pod. I don't do the video, so I can see that. Is
yeah.
that
So
an issue that we need to, are you hearing this feedback? It sounds like there's wind. I don't think it's me.
you just
I
got
think it's
muted.
me. Oh my gosh, it's me. I'm so sorry. I love that when you complain about something and then but now it seems to have stopped.
Well, I don't know. I wasn't hearing it to begin with, but
Okay. Well, anyway, if
just
it
keep
happens
yourself
again,
muted when you're not talking, and then
I
it'll
will
go
do
away.
that. I'll just
All
keep
right,
this on
look,
muted
we
period.
are not allowed to have fun anymore,
No.
people. But we are allowed to have Kenya Wolff joining us from not from Oxford, Mississippi, as it turns out, but from Memphis, Tennessee, but representing Oxford, Mississippi, having gone to boarding school in Kenya with Holly. Holly, why don't you introduce Kenya and uh, um, bring us up to speed about who our guest is this morning?
Well, her more important credentials is that she is an associate professor at the University of Mississippi in early childhood education and runs a center that she will tell us about doing all kinds of great research on early childhood learning. But only slightly lesser credential is that she is and forever will be one of the it girls in the Rift Valley Academy class of 1992. Yes, that's right, Kenya, you were. And I do believe that it is an expression of the redemptive arc of the universe that you and I are now friends in adulthood because I was really not in your league back then.
Not true at all, Holly. I'm
No,
gonna
that
have to
she's being
argue with
nice.
you.
She was a cool girl, and I have never been cool in my entire life.
Okay,
I've
this is the problem with high school kind of stereotypical dichotomies. Holly was definitely popular. It's just that you were smart. And
no,
so, and
no,
funny. And
I
you
was,
can't be popular in the way that high school girls are popular and also be smart and funny.
but apparently you're smart, which you kept very wisely. You kept that under wraps in high school.
It's
But
true.
you were smart the whole
Can't
time.
let on.
And now you're like all like professor, doctor, whatever. And yeah, you very wisely managed that. So I was smart, but I would not say that I was popular only in the fact that I was so outgoing, it was hard to get rid of me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, and we were friends, and I think that speaks to Holly. She's always was friends with everyone. So
aw,
I'm
how
glad to be here today. Thank you so much for having
yes.
me.
So please, after my poor introduction, tell us, just to start, tell us about your work, what you do there, especially your research that you do, because I think it's so important.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, so I will share. I actually I'll share that I do research when I'm on podcasts, and actually I was able to be on Dr. Phil a couple years ago. I always try to say that my opinions and my research, I disclose that they're not always the opinions of the university. But my research is really focused on early childhood and how we as systems can support young children. And so what happened, kind of how this sparked was I was a young parent and I actually taught high school and never thought I'd be early childhood, but found myself with a daughter and went out looking for childcare and realized that I could not afford it. Childcare would cost more than my mortgage and started looking for some other options, went to some homes and found really scary things happening in those homes. Children, just really not being supervised. And so it got me started on a path for studying how we can support children young, and most of their brain development happens 90% before they're 5. So when I was teaching high school, I was seeing kids that already had huge learning gaps. They weren't reading. There was so much that needed to be done, and I felt like it was almost too late. And so that's how I ended up in early childhood. And my research really has focused on how to holistically support children. So I started a curriculum that is called Growing Healthy Minds, Bodies, and Communities, and it is used in Mississippi as a supplemental curriculum. I've worked with other professors from psychology, from nutrition, And we do work around everything from working with families to cook and create healthy meals. We have food deserts in Mississippi. We're so rural. We have the highest grocery bill, which is wild because we have this beautiful soil, and then we have the highest grocery bill and grocery tax and the lowest incomes in the country. So there are major challenges. And so we work with nutritionists. We also work with psychologists. And we are a very rural state with a lot of segregation. So we do work around diversity issues. And that's been really interesting this year.
Yeah, so talk about that. Uh, how have the last 3 months plus changed things, other than that I assume you're not allowed to say the word diversity anymore?
Yeah, well, that's why I put a disclosure in here because I've continued to use the word diversity and talk about race, just because you can't not talk about race when you talk about poverty and you talk about systems, and you're in Mississippi. So, our state legislature did have a state DEI bill that was passed. Unfortunately, I happen to know the sponsor of the bill, and it was devastating to know because I know that she cares about children. And so it's hard to really understand where people are coming from when you meet them, you know they care, and then they sponsor bills like this. So it's just hard to kind of um, rationalize that thinking or even understand it. But so there is the DEI bill. We dealt with this about 3 years ago. There was the critical race theory issue that you all probably remember nationally.
Yeah, what happened to that? All of a sudden it was TRT and now it's DEI. It's
Mhm.
I guess it went over where also the Sharia law and the
Yeah,
caravans are, like what happened to CRT?
yeah.
Confusing.
It's the moral panic, right? So it had its moment, and then we had to bring something else. Um, But CRT was an interesting for Mississippi. We had just had this beautiful kind of healing moment where we got rid of our state flag, which has been so controversial. And so you see progress, and then all of the sudden you see the CRT bill where every Black legislature stood up and actually left during that vote in protest. And so when you have a state that's that divided, it was disappointing after we had just had that victory with the flag.
And so, how does a change in DEI policy under the new bill or under federal policy affect what you're trying to do?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a real debate in academia. A lot of programs and people are just changing their wording to we're more open, accepting, and really continuing in the spirit of their programs and their work, which is semantics. And then others are saying if we continue to give way and really kind of preemptively comply, then how much further are we going to go? And so some of us are just saying, look, we're going to leave the wording diversity, equity, inclusion in our syllabi. Of course, I'm putting myself at risk for saying that out here. But I do think we had a win with the Supreme Court. And so I think, we're going to see some pushback on this. In public schools that are really already struggling with funding, that's where I don't want to put them at risk. So
Right.
that's where there's a fine line. You don't want others who are already kind of struggling to then lose their public funding.
So we had a good question in the chat, asking about sort of in Mississippi, parents, school boards, also just the students that you work with. Like, do you get pushback from your own students? Because obviously Ole Miss is not really known as a terribly enlightened university. How does that go for you as you interact with people around the state?
Yeah, so I think things have really changed in Mississippi, and that's a narrative that we don't. For every time we do make some progress, obviously there's some pushback. So I won't say that there isn't pushback, and that I really do try to promote critical thinking. So I try to present the facts, the materials, and look at systematic kind of policies when we look at public policy around early childhood rather than just, go in guns blazing. I absolutely want pushback. I want people to be thinking, having that really good democratic dialogue that is the reason that we have higher education. So I do not try to go in, with of course I have bias. We all have our own bias, but I do try to be very mindful because we are in a conservative context. But I do talk about supporting families. And so, for example, we have all kinds of families. We talk about LGBTQ plus families. We talk about how we have to support children's identities. And that means unpacking our own bias. If we're teachers, we don't want to go in with bias. I know the research, you've probably seen it from Harvard, where we are expelling Black African American boys in preschool at higher rates than kids are being expelled in high school. So, as preschool teachers, they actually have done eye tracking research where preschool teachers are actually looking at boys and African American or Black boys more often, and they're even seeing misbehaviors when they're asked to look for misbehaviors in the classroom that aren't there. And so we know that's our own bias and we need to unpack that. So I hope I'm answering your question, but we can't ethically not address it in the classroom because our teachers need to be prepared.
So I mean, are they sort of open to the research? Like, I mean, I think the great thing about, well, it used to be the great thing about science or social science is like it's hard to argue with when it's in the data. But nowadays, I guess we
That's
argue with
so
every. Yeah,
2020.
I know. Yeah. But when you do quantify it like that, like you run a study and you can literally count the number of times a teacher is looking at a Black, boy versus, a white girl or whatever, that does seem compelling. Do you see your students' minds sort of change in the process of learning?
That's what you want to see. And certainly that's why I went into education. There are moments. Um, it's hard, and I've seen that over the years it's gotten harder and harder. We do come in with our own preconceived notions, and we do tend to be polarized. But I have seen, I mean, I definitely have. And what's so interesting about Mississippi is there is this Southern kindness and openness that gets lost in some of the historical kind of segregation and history and all of this. And so I do see the willingness to talk in class, which is helpful. But I hope that doesn't disappear. I hope that our teachers and our professors are willing to go there so that we can have those moments and that they aren't too scared to.
So I'm curious about you know, when you look at a state like Mississippi and you think about early childhood education and these wildly disparate outcomes that are happening once you get to high school, what needs to be happening in the uh, before you're five that for a lot of people is not happening? What's the fundamental gap?
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you asked that. There's so much research that shows, I mean, basically it's relationships. So our parents have to be supported so that they aren't distracted, so they aren't stressed, so that they are basically making eye contact, having those, we call it serve and return interactions with their children, showing their children that they're safe, that they're loved. That's how we connect. We're wired for connection, but how we wire our brains. And so there's so much neuroscience now that supports this. And when our parents are distracted, whether it's because they can't pay their bills or they are too stressed or they're just on their phones or whatever it is, our children suffer. And so my biggest message right now to get out is we have to save Head Start. Head Start is our largest kind of support for families, not just for children. Children get meals that they wouldn't get otherwise. They get access to health care. They're social workers at Head Start, and they're really a two-generational system that is embedded in the civil rights kind of um, move for kind of social supports for equity and justice. And in states like Mississippi, without Head Start, our children are going to suffer. And I can't even think a generation ahead of what will happen. And I know we've seen some leaks to that budget that is devastating. And so that I think is my biggest takeaway is please, and it's not just for others' children, it is for our society. We need to make sure that children are fed and they have access to nutrition and safe places to grow.
And just for those for whom Head Start is just the name of a program uh, that probably costs money, what is, I mean, you've listed some of the things that happen in Head Start, but what is the sort of aggregate product of this program? What does it do?
I'm so glad you said that. So actually, I'm not usually a plugger of my own podcast, but we did have Heckman, who is an economist. He won the Nobel Prize for this. He actually was able to show through many studies that for every dollar we spend in Head Start and other quality early childhood programs, there's a $7 return rate on that investment. And it's because we aren't then having to pay for early intervention services. Because they're embedded. Special ed is reduced because we already were able to target some of those deficits and bring children to where they needed to be. Prisons are, we have fewer people in prison. We have people able to be employed. And I mean, the list just goes on and on at the savings to us as a society. If we're going to invest anywhere, we should be investing early.
And are you, I know you were in Washington recently because I saw you. So trying to talk to your own Republican lawmakers. Obviously, you have a Republican governor, and I guess is the state House majority Republican as well.
Yes.
I assume there's a lot.
Interesting fact that I learned when I just recently, Mississippi since 1980 has voted the way of the president. I thought that was interesting.
Really?
Yeah.
Like whatever the Democrats sometimes?
Yeah, I was shocked. I didn't realize I had only known us as a red state. But
Yeah.
but
Well,
yeah,
Bill Clinton,
I didn't
was
mean to
a
cut you
Southern.
off, but yes, I was
Oh,
in
yeah,
Washington.
that's very weird. I assume Mississippi is just intractably Republican, so that's interesting. I think probably in the last 20 or so years it is intractably, and I'm sure there's a lot of gerrymandering. Like what? This is a side note before I get back to my original question, but I'm sure there's a lot of I mean, there's a lot of sorry, but there's a lot of corruption in Mississippi. But there's a lot of gerrymandering. What is, I assume that offsets because there's a large Black population
We
there.
have
Like
the
what's the
largest Black.
percentage?
We have the largest Black population in the US. It's around 37%.
Yeah. So if that, I mean, I assume that the state legislature or the House delegation is not 37% Black, I'm guessing.
Well, what's interesting, I mean, I would have to look. It's definitely not women,
Yeah.
but yeah, there is an imbalance for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
But I don't want to misspeak, so I would have to look at the makeup right now.
Sure. I'm just, yeah, I don't
It
know
is
off the top.
very segregated.
Yeah.
So yes, but
Yeah.
I need to look.
So now I've lost my point, of course. I should never do side notes at my age because you're never gonna go back to it.
So I want to ask about the uh, just going back to Head Start. Um, again, you've described the benefits of it, but I want I want to get you to describe what it is.
Sure.
What is it that the Head Start program offers that if you cut it from the budget will disappear?
Yeah, sure. So one of the reasons I believe it's being targeted is the way it was designed to as part of the war on poverty, but also to give local control. So that federal money goes straight to the grantees and not to the state. And so one of the ways that it's
And it
set
is
up,
run, am I right, through the Department of Education?
it is actually not that well. So this money, it goes straight to the grantees who do write the grant. But what's interesting is there's a bidding process and there's local control with a board that's very local. Um, the community members, often some of the teacher assistants, they're all from the local community. So here in Mississippi, we actually have, I think I just wrote it, I just was reading about it, but we have in every county, we have representation in Head Start and early Head Start. Um, children, so a local board is more in control. They're once the funding is given, and they actually have to then kind of re-up every certain I think it's every 3 to 5 years, depending on when the call is. I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah, I'm just trying to imagine how the world in Mississippi looks different if there is a massive cut to Head Start. Who,
who
you know,
fills the gap in rural Mississippi, especially there, it's one of our largest employers. And so that's another huge issue. It's a workforce issue as much as it is a health and education issue. Um, but one of our biggest issues is we are so rural that there are not child care centers that would make a profit. They just couldn't be in some of these smaller towns. And so, how families are going to operate when many of them travel miles and miles and miles to get to work, um, I'm just not sure who's going to fill in the gap.
Well, probably a lot of kids will just be kind of neglected or like, like these house daycares, like you mentioned, you seeing that motivated you to go to graduate school in the first place, where, just a bunch of kids are piled in a house and there's very little care actually given. So,
and has there been, I mean, I would think if not on the childcare basis, on the employment basis, there would be some pushback to this. Have you found that there is, uh, I mean, obviously not in the circles professionally that you move, but have people noticed that this is coming for them?
Well, when Holly mentioned I was in DC and I was speaking to the staffers of our senators, our state senators, and they basically said that the communication about budget issues, they were just kind of playing catch up. They were hearing things through leaks. They were, every day they were kind of just reacting to some of the news. And so I feel like, our communities, I'm not sure how many of them are aware of what's coming. I do know that, our state budgets, we're running, what are we, almost to, well, we're in May 1st, we don't know what our state budget is for several of our state programs that deal with child care subsidies and other things. So I think there's just a lot of uncertainty, and we're all kind of bracing. And we need to be here, whether federal programs and state programs are here or not. I mean, I hate to say that, but as community members, we need to start filling in the gaps because these kids are going to be hungry and they're going to need safe places to be.
well, you know, so there is some state funding, but I'm sure it's nothing compared. I mean, Mississippi is not a wealthy tax base, so it's probably meager compared to the federal. funding that you would get. Or the governor, do you have any indication that this is registering with the governor, or does he even care? He seems like a real fine person.
I will I will plead no comment other than that I do know that I did also do some educational events at the state capitol, and our state is working, their number one priority has been to eliminate our income tax. So that has been their number one priority.
Well, the number one priority of the guys who just showed up in a large truck with chainsaws outside is to make as much noise as humanly possible to
Is
make it.
it Elon? Is it Elon and
It
his
is not Elon, and the chainsaws do seem to be being used appropriately on a neighbor's tree rather than. But I apologize for the noise in any event.
It's fine. It's
Which,
not too bad, Ben.
all right, well, I'm just saying. Um, so I'm curious how how you tell this story. So, in all the things that are going on in Washington, you know, the trickle down effects to early childcare in rural Mississippi is, I mean, it's it's hard for me to imagine how you get people's attention with that, given how dramatic the day-to-day events are. And I'm curious,
Yeah,
like,
yeah. What
how
the
how
narrative?
you're working that.
Yeah,
Whose hands are you,
right.
whose faces are you waving your hands in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've got to, tell the story. And one of the things that I try to talk about is, you talked about chainsaws. I think our system is broken, and we need to be asking kind of, one, I love the story of the river where, you see a dead fish and you maybe think, okay, that something's wrong with the fish. You see maybe a school of fish, oh, something might be wrong with the community. We are seeing, of course, multiple issues in society show up that, to me, our story has to be, this is a systemic problem. It's in the groundwater, and that groundwater is very much in how we're supporting our families and our children. So, telling that story, really letting science tell the story. We have the ACEs study. Are you guys familiar with that?
Uh,
Uh,
Because
no.
they did it on missionary kids. Did you know that, Kate,
I
Kenya?
didn't know that. I
Yeah,
didn't know
yeah.
that. I do that with my students a lot, and it can be hard because, of course, I don't ever want to be deterministic and say, okay, you had this many aces, this is your, destiny.
That's
So wait,
adverse
what
childhood
is the
experience.
ACEs study?
So it's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And this is fascinating because Kaiser Permanente did this study. They really just wanted to see, relationships between children's experiences and their health. But what we found was just so much more rich, and it's been replicated in multiple countries and for many years. We know that the children that have the most adverse experiences in childhood then go on to have high rates of cancer, of heart disease, of smoking, of drug use, and of suicide. And so if we can prevent these adverse childhood experiences, which are things like child abuse, neglect, extreme poverty, and being exposed to violence in early childhood, we can really change the outcome, health outcomes for not only your physical health, but mental health outcomes. So we've got to do this for our society. We know that our mental health issues in this country, 1 in 5 are on some kind of antidepressant. I'm not saying that it's all ACEs related, but it's certainly, the science shows that we need to be starting young.
Well, and I think we're finding more out, and I have some friends whose personal stories, I think, indicate that just the connection between the mind body connection, and how, these traumatic events and experiences like literally cause physical disease. But I wanted to ask you, I know you come from the sort of evangelical world, as do I. And, you know, in theory, they care a lot about families and children, right? And obviously, Mississippi must obviously has a high population of white evangelical Christians. Is this something, have you tried to sort of present this message to these audiences and groups? Do you think that, I mean, obviously private groups are not going to make up the difference in terms of government funding. But in terms of trying to spur more action or support for the government funding, is this something is this like a group of people you've targeted in your messaging?
That's a really great point. And certainly churches are a huge political force and just societal force in the South. I actually am speaking to a church group next week about early childhood and the importance of it. So I do, it is interesting. And when we talk evangelical, one of the things when we were studying how to, get support for better pay in early childhood for our caregivers who are paid less than parking attendants. So think about that. We value our cars more than we do our children. Uh, but basically, um, we went to look at the website. We have a workforce back to work for women website. Imagine that the governor's office has this website. There was not one mention of childcare on the website. So there's a disconnect, and I think it's on purpose. I do think that there's still this old-fashioned notion maybe that women shouldn't be using childcare. They should be at home watching their children, and yet we have this modern notion of we need more workers, let's get women to work.
Okay, so but let's say you take all of the nice white people who can stay, whose women should be staying home because they're able to, and I assume, but and obviously there's a lot of scorn and judgment heaped upon poor communities of color, but still like I would, again, maybe I'm naive, but I remember evangelicals at least pretending to care about children, no matter what their color is, back in the day. Maybe that was all just hypocrisy and window dressing. But again, if you appeal for children, like I would think that they would understand that, like, okay, these are single mother households. These are households where the mother is going to have to work, or just like, let's say the mother does stay home. Early childhood education is good regardless. Like to have your child in a preschool by the time they're sort of 3 or 4, and to get that education is really valuable no matter what the mother is doing, right?
It is. And I will say we have made some progress. I have a colleague who fought really hard just to get kindergarten 25 years ago here into Mississippi. Now we do have a state pre-K 4, which is in several counties. It's not everywhere. It's definitely not totally accessible to everyone. But you may have heard of the Mississippi Miracle recently, where we went from fighting kind of 45th or 49th and 50th in literacy to we have moved up to middle of the pack. And many people will say that that is because of our pre-K 4, along with some other kind of literacy initiatives. So I do think we're making traction. I don't want it to sound that, like we are still in the dark ages here. And I think many people get it, but then we have these kind of competing narratives of divesting from community spending. I mean, we have Modge here. I don't know if Holly, I shared with you, but we have our state auditor is calling he has Modge, Mississippi's version of Dodge. Yeah. So we
Yeah,
are
I know, I remember that. I just didn't, I was like, when I hear Modge, I think of Modge Podge because I'm a crafter. It's like a crafter
that is
glue.
a great glue.
All right, I'm still hung up on this uh funding point. Because the more I hear you talk, the more I'm like, okay, if I'm a state government official responsible for my state's budget, um, regardless of ideology, I can be the most dojiest, mojiest, mojiest, whatever person in the world, and yet I have there's this budgetary reality that if Congress does not fund Head Start, I'm going to have lots and lots of children uncared for, lots and lots of women mostly who cannot work because they have to be taking care of their kids, and lots of employed people suddenly unemployed because they're in the childcare business.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out why state governments are not responding to this with with panic, frankly, in somewhat the same way they do if um, if you cut other major subsidies to state functioning, like highway funds or whatever. Um, and I'm finding ideology to be an inadequate answer to that question because money usually finds a way to trump ideology. So help me through it. Why is the governor of Mississippi not sounding like you?
That's a great question. And I often wonder if we aren't more similar than we give each other credit for, and if there aren't things happening behind closed doors. I mean, this is Head Start is one of our largest employers, and Mississippi gets federal funding like no other state. We are one of the poorest states, and we qualify for all kinds of federal funding. And yet, if you listen to most of our politicians here, they are all for slashing the budget. It does not make any sense. My thought is they are saying something that sounds very popular to their voters. And then behind closed doors, I would hope that they are fighting for these programs because we need them. And I
Yeah,
guess that's a very
I,
Pollyanna view.
well, I will also just say that if that's the answer, if the saving grace here is hypocrisy, um, you know, that's almost in some ways worse. I mean, it's better in practice, but in some ways it's almost worse than um, than if they're just complacent about it. Because, over time, you actually do have to create a political constituency for these programs. And if people, think about Social Security, where it is actually a third rail. Social Security used to be politically contested, and it isn't anymore. And the reason is that there is a political constituency that understands the program, that understands that they have put into the program over time, and that feels entitled. And I'm using that word not in the negative sense
Mhm.
of like entitled children or whatever, but in the actual sense that it is an entitlement program, right? And they feel entitled rightly to get the benefits of it having put in all this time. And they make it impossible a for politicians not to support the program. And I think if you don't do that work, irrespective of ideology, irrespective of your attitudes towards other things, then the political support for the program atrophies over time, and you end up with this situation in which you can put a huge number of people out of work by screwing kids and screwing their mothers. Um, Like it's a lose, lose, lose proposition. But if you're not willing to publicly make a case for it as a politician, you're really contributing to the problem.
Ben, I couldn't agree more. And you just reminded me. So last month I was in Italy. I was able to go visit a Reggio Emilia school. Reggio Emilia was one of the hardest hit cities. I mean, all of them were in World War II. But the beauty of the story is that in the rubble, they actually discovered a tank, and the city decided to sell this tank and built with the rubble, which is very symbolic, and also it's amazing to see it still there. The first Reggio Emilia city school, which it was a preschool that was dedicated to fighting fascism, and they said to themselves, how do we build a school and a philosophy in this school so that this war and others like it will not happen again? And what they did was they built a system that their city fought for, and it has become one of the best school systems in the world. But they have built into the system parental involvement, expectation. They have city councils that support these schools. They go out into the community and put these schools on show. And it is very visible that this is not just something that's an entitlement, but it's a right that has to be fought for because it can be taken away. And I think we've lost that. I think we've taken for granted some of these programs, and we haven't fought for them the way that we need to.
I think the key is like for Social Security, there's not a, sorry, now I have people outside my window doing things.
The guys outside my window have now brought in a giant wood chipper.
Oh, well, now I've got,
and so I like
can you
things
hear
are
me at
just,
all? It's like right outside.
I'm I've got you so outdone here. We've got
Okay, well, I can't even hear yours. I just hear mine now in my ear. But anyway,
I'm a little jealous. No one's working in my neighborhood.
Oh, well. Anyway, I was going to say, I think the difference with Social Security is it's kind of a, like everybody, it's not, it's not targeted, like everybody pays into, even wealthy people pay into Social Security and get Social Security. And so there's no sort of stigma it's literally an entitlement just by being, an American or having a Social Security number versus I think some of these programs, and you'll have to, if you have the stats on this, I'd be interested, but I would guess like a lot of maybe even white Mississippians who use these programs might consider them as, oh, these are programs for the other people and I'm not benefiting from the programs.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of they've done various polling and research with regards to various programs, and like people want government benefits, but they want it for their kind of people, not for the other people.
Yeah, but Kenya's point here is look, I don't think this should be a difficult case to make. If you are a rich white person who runs a business in Mississippi, your cost of labor is going up if there are fewer people in the workforce, right? If you take out a whole lot of women because they're staying home to take care of kids, or if they're chronically being called into other situations because their neglected kids are getting in trouble, your labor costs are going up. If you're, this isn't hard, right? Like if you're screwing up generations of small children, you pay the costs of that in 1,000 different ways. And to pretend it's no different from highway money, right? If your infrastructure sucks, you're going to distribute a lot of costs to that. And you can say, well, I'm not getting a check myself, but you're getting a society that works better. And the idea that we should be justifying every penny that gets paid to, X person rather than Y person, rather than saying, what are the aggregate economic benefits to society? And leave aside the non-economic benefits, the less human suffering. I understand
Why
we
should we
don't.
ask about doing good or because
Right.
it's a moral question? No,
Okay, yeah,
no, let's
I
just talk
accept that we're not going to talk in those terms, but if you're just talking in economic terms, and the cold-blooded reptile in me likes to do that sometimes. Like, this is not a situation where it should be hard to explain to people what they're getting out of it. And it frustrates me a lot that, the thing that you've said that really makes my blood boil is that you're hoping that people are saying something different in private than the thing they're saying in public, because that strikes me as just corrosive. And somebody needs to go out and make the case. uh, I mean, you're doing it obviously, but I mean at the political level, hey, I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, I don't believe in, blah blah blah, but I don't want a generation of neglected children and a generation of people, mostly but not exclusively women, unable to work in Mississippi. And you can play it
and
out over
throughout the country. I
throughout the
mean, this
country.
is definitely a national issue. So
I think it's like the pothole. You see that immediately. Like the funny, like the roads are going to break down, and you have to drive on that road. I think the problem with a lot of these social programs is there's less the connection. It's further down the road, right? And so and it also is like depending on who you are, like it may not affect you personally. It's a more theoretical. We're not very good in America at sort of thinking in societal terms. We're such an individualistic. It's like me and mine, and if me and mine are good, then and we don't really understand, like, okay, but you live in a society, like it's the whole public school thing versus the voucher thing. It's like, okay, you want to send your kid to a private school, fine, but you live in a society with other people who aren't doing that, and public education is something you do benefit from. It's not like it's not cut so thinly. So I just think we're really bad as a culture of thinking that way.
And we're bad at thinking about long-term planning
Yes.
as a general matter.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, you mentioned a particular town in Italy, but what societies are doing early childhood education right? Um, are there standout countries that you look at and say, wow, the Tajiks really have this down?
definitely. And what they're doing is they are investing in their, you know, pedagogist. They're not paying, $7.25 an hour. They're saying these are brain architects. And so we're going to send you to school. You're going to have a master's degree. And, we're going to invest as we do in K through 12. They're doing it in birth and even prenatal programs through 5. I've traveled to Denmark, and of course, I just mentioned Italy. Some of those Nordic countries all are really outperforming us. And they're not using push down academics where they're trying to do flashcards with 3-year-olds. They're simply paying a living wage to their very highly qualified caregivers, and they're making it accessible for every child. And so you see in Denmark, it's beautiful to watch the families take their bikes to the neighborhood childcare center. The city planning is beautifully done. I also visited New Zealand, where the childcare centers are right next to the schools in the neighborhood. So parents are able to just drop off kind of seamlessly. And so societies and systems are really being, they're planning for families and family life and modern life. Um, they also, again, they're just investing, and they know the importance of it. Their curriculum is play-based, relationship-based, and it is not this kind of race to the test score. Um,
They're not teaching 3-year-olds calculus.
and I'm not against that. I really think there's so many different ways to teach children, but we certainly have a lot to learn from other countries.
Okay, we just a few minutes left. So I have a question for you, a tongue-in-cheek question for you, Kenya. Given your vast knowledge of toddlers and small children, I wonder, like, what's the best way to deal with the toddler-in-chief?
Oh, I love that because I was a toddler teacher for 1 year and also I'm a yoga instructor. So
Uh-huh.
it's not about the toddler, it's about you, the adult. So I
Okay.
always say you have to breathe through it. That toddler has just learned that they are an individual with a voice and a
A
will.
very loud voice
Yeah.
and a social media account.
So it is very developmental for them to have all these tantrums and to exert their will. And so you learning to breathe through it. Now, I believe in boundaries and consistency. So don't think I'm a pushover. But I will say that this too shall pass. And so, and also lots of, I do a lot of redirection with toddlers. They have short attention spans, kind of like my golden retriever. It's like, look, here's something else. Let's distract you.
Have you ever had to tell a toddler, uh, look, there's a missile attack on Kyiv? You know, redirecting you from that business deal you want to do in the Arctic with Putin.
I feel like this is redirection is exactly what the whole first term was about. They literally handled him like a toddler, and actually on the whole, I think they handled him pretty well, certainly from what I saw, because I was still working in the government. The problem is now we have a bunch of overindulgent preschool teachers in there who don't have any boundaries, and they're just letting the toddler do what, and a lot of them are toddlers, quite frankly. So,
Yeah.
I mean, you have to like it's
Full
really,
circle here.
yeah, he's really like a grown toddler. So,
Well,
Don't insult toddlers, please.
no, it's very
oh,
unfair.
that's true. Yeah.
It's very unfair to toddlers because when toddlers do it, it's completely age appropriate
Yeah,
and it can be frustrating, but there's something profoundly different when a 78-year-old behaves like a toddler.
yeah.
Um, uh, you can't, ultimately, you can never really be mad at a toddler.
Oh,
Well,
okay. I
All
wish
right.
I had more when my kids were toddler. I mean, anytime read books or learn about, I just am cognizant of all the many mistakes that I made and like
me
all the
too.
failures because it's so relentless. Parenting is so relentless. I think that's an advantage. That's why I think honestly, I really depended on my children's they had excellent daycare and preschool. They went to the CIA's daycare and preschool, and
Nice.
those people were like top notch.
And they
They
and they got to play with cactuses and snowmen and
Yeah, I mean they and I really depended on them, their support, because as a parent, and I wasn't very good with young children. I think some people have more sort of fortitude with that age group than others. I really, it was important that I could put them there and get like, okay, I'm not teaching my kids this thing, but they are, and they're sort of developing their brains while they're there. And so it offsets my failure as a parent because as a parent, everything is so emotionally fraught and relentless. And for
Absolutely.
teachers, I mean, it's exhausting work, but at least like they are professionally, they're there for a time, they get to go home and get a break. And so I think it's so important, even for high income, like successful parents to have this support.
Absolutely.
I have gone out of focus in an attempt to show People in the chat asked to see Cleo the puppy, and as a result, I am out of focus. I'm going to try to fix that by turning on and off.
No,
Nope,
didn't
no
work.
good.
Bizarre.
It's going to happen sometime.
Cleo's very cute, though.
She is. Look, we are out of time, folks. Kenya, it is fabulous to meet you. Thank you for joining us. You are a great American and
She is.
fighting, excuse me,
Is a great American.
the most important fight there is. And I hope you will come join us again sometime as this deranged public policy choice develops.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated the opportunity. It was great meeting you.
Great American, for sure.
Good to
Folks,
see you,
we will
Holly.
be back tomorrow. I think we have a guest tomorrow, but I'm not sure who it is because I haven't looked at that spreadsheet that Holly and Alicia so meticulously.
I have no one scheduled, so maybe Alicia.
Maybe, or maybe it'll just be us. I don't know who the co-hosts are going to be. I don't know who the guest is going to be. But folks, you'll be there. I'll be there. And by that time, I will be in focus.